Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in Genesis chapter 21, and we're going to see the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. This has been a 25-year journey for Abraham. You go back to Genesis chapter 15, when God first commands Abraham to come out of his, leave his family, right, and just leave them. Of course, he brings Lot. Abraham was 75 years old when that began. When he was 86, I believe 86, he has Ishmael. He's going to come back in the picture here. And but again, this is so we come now full circle. He's 100 years old, and he's getting ready to give birth. Well, he's not. Sarah is. Okay, here we go. Then the Lord came to Sarah as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time God had told him. Now, if you notice that God is, or the inspiration, you can say, of God through Moses is particularly talking about how God fulfills his word. And the reason I want to say that is because that is extremely important. Okay? Extremely important. God's word is always fulfilled. And these jackleg prophets today who prophesy things that do not come to pass are false prophets. That's all I'm going to say on that. My point here to point out is that notice he said his word is always fulfilled. That's my point here. Verse 3. Abraham named his son who was born to him, the one Sarah bore to him. So this wasn't from Hagar, right, or any other concubine or slave. So he named him Isaac. Verse 4. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son was born to him. Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears will laugh with me. She also said, who would have told Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his own age. Now you have to keep in mind too that not having children was an extreme embarrassment. It was bad for women. And then on top of that, not to have a male was even worse. Now that said, we're living in a time right here, women just wasn't valued. So if you had 8 children and 7 of them were girls, who cares? It was the one son. Now on the other hand, if you had 7 sons, boy, you accomplished that. That's it. You've accomplished that. That's just the sinful world. That's what it was back then. Okay. So, verse 8, the child grew and was weaned. So, 2 or 3, whatever, right? And Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son mocking, the one Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham. Now, he's about 13 at this time, okay? And it's interesting that as he is mocking, you kind of have to wonder where this is coming from, right? The mocking. Now, if you kind of go back, you remember that Hagar got whooped on by Sarah because she had kind of got out of her place. When Abraham got her pregnant, she was kind of like walking around, and Sarah, like, she got it, kind of got disrespectful. So she complained to Abraham, was like, hey, slave was mistreating me. So Abraham was like, hey, she's your slave. So she whooped on him. Okay. You kind of have to kind of see. It seems like that attitude never changed. Might not have been expressed, but not changing. Here, you see the son mocking. Why? Anyway, verse 10. So she said to Abraham, "Drive out this slave with her son, for the son of this slave will not be a co-heir with my son Isaac." Now this was a very difficult thing for Abraham because of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be concerned about the boy and your slave. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her, because your offspring will be traced through Isaac. But I will also make a nation of the slave's son, because he is your offspring." So right there, that's the comfort that Abraham had. Now he could move forward. Now, and it should be noted that this is probably the extreme here is specifically God's purpose, because God does not want any interruptions here. No, kind of tie back to Isaac. In other words, Isaac is the promised seed. And that's extremely important. In other words, Hagar never should have happened. Okay? And so let's move on, because this is, it is hard. And think about it this way too. What we're going to see. He's just going to send it off kind of like with a loaf of bread. But notice the promise that God had said to Abraham. Okay, so verse number 14. Early in the morning, Abraham got up, took bread and water skin, and put them on Hagar's shoulder, and sent her and the boy away. She left and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water and the skin was gone, she left the boy under the bushes, and then she went and sat down nearby, about a bowl's shot away, for she said, "I can't bear to watch the boy die." So as she sat nearby, she wept loudly. Now you can kind of see at this point right here, it's like, wow. Now on the one hand, she's free, right? She's not a slave anymore, but he sent her out with nothing. Okay, nothing. And so from her perspective, hey, life is not going good, but it's about to change. Let's see, where am I at here? Oh, verse number 17. God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy from the place where he is. Get up, help the boy up, and support him, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the water skin and gave the boy drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew and settled in the wilderness and became an archer. And he settled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got him a wife from the land of Egypt. So God doesn't care, why? Because he's not the promised seed. So yeah, you can marry someone from Egypt, you can marry a Canaanite, who cares? Our concern is for the bloodline of Isaac. That's what this is all about right here. The bloodline of Isaac. That we're not going to be concerned. But the purpose of this is to show that he is in no way tied to Isaac. So he doesn't even, remember, Abraham was vastly wealthy. Abraham could have sent her out with herds. It wouldn't even, herds and a whole, even her own slaves, right? Money, he could have sent her out, but he sent her out with just bread and wineskin. And I think part of the reason is that Isaac, as far as inheritance in terms of the bloodline, is to no way be tied to Isaac. And but also God builds from him a great nation. And that can't be tied back to Isaac or Abraham. That's the point. But God did bless him, though. And so you have to say, even though it looks like it's kind of a harsh treatment, no, it wasn't harsh treatment at all, because God watched over and God looked out after Ishmael. All right. Did I finish here? Yes. So we go on. We will see Ishmael later on when he comes to bury. He comes to bury Abraham. So at some point during the lifespan of Isaac and Ishmael, they keep in touch because, like I say, Ishmael will come. We'll see him later on when Isaac buries Abraham. All right. So verse 22. At that time, Abimelech, accompanied by Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Swear to me by God here and now that you will not break an agreement with me or with my children or the descendants. As I have been loyal to you, so you will be loyal to me in the country where you are a foreign resident. Abraham said, I swear it. Now you remember God came to Abraham and God came to Abimelech and said, you if you don't return this man's wife, you're a dead man. So now he's seeking this kind of agreement here. Verse 25. But Abraham complained to Abimelech because of the water well that Abimelech's servant had seized. And Abimelech replied, I don't know who did this thing. You didn't report it to me. So I haven't heard about it until today. Abraham took sheep, cattle, and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Abraham separated 7 ewe lambs from the flock. Now, notice this here. I just want to kind of piggyback on something I just made. Notice how Abraham gives him out of his flock. And the reason why I want to bring this out is because notice he didn't give Hagar anything. Okay, I'm just belaboring this. He didn't give Abraham Hagar anything except water and a loaf of bread. Like I said, he could have really loaded her up. But God had already promised that he would take care of her. So, all right. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, where am I at? Verse 29. And Abimelech said to Abraham, why have you separated these 7 ewe lambs? He replied, you are to accept the 7 ewe lambs from my hand, so that this act will serve as a witness that I dug this well. Therefore the place was called Beersheba, because it was there that the two of them swore an oath. After they had made a covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his armies, left and returned to the land of the Philistines. Kind of interesting. Notice that term. Excuse me. The Philistines. Abraham planted a terasphic tree under Beersheba, and there he called the name Yahweh, the everlasting God. And Abraham lived as a foreigner in the land of the Philistines for many days. Now, when they talk about many days, oftentimes it can mean months, even sometimes years. And yet God is not yet going to judge or destroy the Philistines. That will come much, much later, centuries later, as a matter of fact. But we just, at this point now, Isaac is about 2 or 3 years old. And Abraham is sort of safe, though. Again, what is interesting to note is how other people will fear God and come to know God and fear Him. So think about that. All right, guys. Chapter 22 in our next study. So I will see you then. All right.